Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IMAGIN Webinar Series. And we are in Season 2, and this is our 5th installment. Today, for our webinar, we're going to be talking about the GISP certification process and how to hopefully help you smooth some bumps in the path of getting that certification. With us today are Scott Swan and Magdalena DiFranco, who are going to talk about the program of GISP certification and then also share their experiences on how they were able to get their certification. Again, so welcome to our webinar today. I want to go over just a couple of slides just to introduce our webinar today and give you some background information. I always like to thank our sponsors. We have had 4 great sponsors for our whole season this year, and that includes Giffords Webster, BSNA Software, Hubble Roth and Clark, and Fishbeck Engineers. So they are all long-term sponsors of IMAGIN. We're all very willing to help us out this year with sponsorships as we've been staying home. But we're looking forward to being back in person soon with more of our events coming. But for now, we're doing these webinars, and we appreciate all the great content our presenters have had. Couple of housekeeping items for today. Just to let you know, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll post these recordings up about a few days later, probably middle of next week. I should get the recording posted up. And you can send your questions throughout the presentation using the questions panel. Myself and Jerry Swanson are monitoring those questions, and we'll share those with the presenters during appropriate times throughout the presentation. And then just make sure you stay in touch with us on our imagine.org website or social media. A lot of plans are coming together for the fall. IMAGIN board just had their planning session. We're starting to figure out what our fall and then winter looks like. And want to also just encourage you to take a look at all of the information that's on our website. So thank you again for joining. And at this point, I'll go ahead and hand presentation over to Scott, who's going to start our webinar today.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this presentation for a while. I really enjoy presenting it, and hopefully it'll inspire some of you to go out and get your certification. So we've got the two of us, Magdalena and I, both are GISPs. I've been a GISP for 15 years, so I've kind of got the historical. I'll be showing you a little bit about the evolution of the GISP certification. And then Magdalena just completed hers in January, so she'll be able to tell you a little bit more about the current experience of going through it, and maybe give you some insight or some tips on what the best process is as far as going through it. So this is hopefully will give you the best of both worlds with this presentation today. So, little history first. We'll go back to 2003. The first GIS certification occurred. They didn't have the test at the time, and I know a lot of you are going to have questions about the core knowledge exam. They introduced the core knowledge exam in 2015. So basically, what that means is, a lot of people got certified before they had the test, and it was basically the same process without the test. And you'll see what else goes into the certification. That is not part of the test. You'll see sort of the portfolio that has to be developed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to focus on, a little bit in this presentation. I'm going to talk about the value of the certification. I think a lot of you are here because you already understand the value, so I won't go into too much detail there. I don't think I have to sell it to you because I'm sort of preaching to the choir. But you'll get an idea of sort of why they developed the GISP certification, and then in addition, why they developed the test. It wasn't just to punish you guys. It was, there's a reasoning behind the test, and it gives more value to the certification. So let's start by talking about the certification just in general. Make sure everybody understands what this is, and then we'll go through some of the steps here. We'll talk about the history and the current process. And then I'll spend pretty much the last half of this presentation. I'm going to talk about the exam and maybe give you some tips on what you might want to study and what you don't need to study, which may be even more important. So number one reason to certify is just basically to show that you have the experience and the knowledge to do the profession. So we're starting to see a lot more, over the past 10 years or so, we've seen a lot more jobs that are interested, at least looking for people with GISP certifications. And in fact, with the public list available of who's GISP certified, you can actually have employers go out there and look for people specifically that have the certification. So it's definitely a huge mark on the resume that you can add and kind of expand your resume and show your skills. So GIS, as you know, it's a fairly young industry. And anybody that's involved in GIS knows that it's only been around for a few decades at this point. It's probably getting into being a handful of decades now. But from any industry, when you start with just the idea and the technology, it tends to evolve pretty slowly in the beginning there. So you have people with a lot of data, you have people that want to analyze that data spatially, you have people that want to map out their data. And in the beginning of this industry, in the beginning of this technology, GIS, I think even today, GIS is always kind of waiting for the technology to catch up to be able to expand even further and to do more. We have, you look back at what was capable in GIS back in the 90s and the 2000s, and GIS had the ability to do much more, but people just didn't have the computing power to do it. So the GIS, being a technical industry, has always sort of followed with the capabilities of the computers that most people have. There's always been a little bit more that you could do if you wanted to really upgrade your system or get on an advanced server or really expand your computing power. But the industry didn't provide that and didn't make that part of the standard technology because it wasn't mainstream. It wasn't what most people had. So once the industry starts to catch up, or once the industry starts to really embrace the concept of GIS, then it becomes a profession. You think about the very early days of GIS, people, the very, very early days, people that operated computers weren't necessarily spatially oriented. They weren't geographically oriented. And in fact, some of the early GIS pioneers had to rely on computer operators to operate the systems and to input the information in order to be able to, actually come to conclusions. And then as GIS, or as computers started to, appear on everyone's desktop and others started to use computers, that's when the industry really kind of developed into a profession. So people could do the computing themselves. And once you have the profession, that's where people can say, I've been doing this for 5 years, or I've been doing this for 10 years, or I've been doing this for 20 years. But it doesn't mean much if they've only been doing one specific thing. If someone, for whatever reason, learns to digitize, for example, or just data entry, and they've been doing the same data entry for 10 years, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a really good GIS professional. They're probably going to be really good at editing and modifying data, but there's a lot more to the industry than just data entry. So that's where certification comes in. With certification, you can kind of bump up that industry growth and really expand it so that people, the people hiring or the people looking for someone to do their work for them, know that they have a minimum level of capability and understanding. So there's a lot of other industries that do the same thing. GIS, obviously GISP is not the first industry certification to come out, but they all sort of follow this same timeline. The industry develops into a profession, and then the profession needs the certification in order to essentially certify people as being at a certain level of growth in their field. And then typically certifications develop into different levels. I can think of one example. There's a marine technology certification that a lot of my colleagues and students, attempt to attain. And basically, in the marine technology certifications, you're certified at the level of your college degree. So if you have an associate's, you get a certain level. If you have a bachelor's, you get another level. But that basically is there's more to it than that, but it basically allows you to have different levels of certification. With GISP right now, it's still set at just one certification, which we'll talk about what level that is here in a bit. But it just gives you an idea of you've met that minimum level. So one important fact is that GISP is a certification. It is not a licensure. We're not licensing you as a GIS person. Licensure typically develops from an industry where you have life or injury at risk. If there's a possible, there's a liability to humans involved, or in some cases it may be materials or equipment or valuables. But the licensure would be, a different level. Certification is just saying that you have a certain level of capability and knowledge. So a little side fact there, you can see in 2016, in non-institutional workers, so we're not talking about hospitals and things, but in non-institutional civilian industries, about 17% of the workers had some kind of a certification or license. And then real quick, here's a shout out to the other member organizations with GIS-CI. The Certification Institute is I should probably discuss this real quickly here, but the GIS Certification Institute is the organization that does the GISP certification. So they administer the tests, they administer the lists. These are some of the partner organizations that work with the GIS-CI. GIS-CI essentially came out of the need for this certification. It's literally was developed as part of the GISP certification. So it's a standalone institution. It's not, they didn't want, a couple of these organizations at the time, like UCGIS and ERISA, they were talking about a need for a certification, and they were starting to look at doing one themselves. And they finally decided not to muddy the waters with a bunch of different industry certifications from different specific organizations. So they went ahead and kind of got together and developed the GIS-CI instead. So again, this is different than IMAGIN. This is an institute that is the sole purpose is for expanding the GISP certification throughout the world. So let's talk a little bit about the history. People hate doing the history stuff, but this will give you a much better understanding of why we have the GISP at the level that we have it today. So in 2003, during their initial trial, their sort of guinea pig test, there were 29 GISPs. As they certified individuals with the GISP certification, it allowed them to develop a core group of people that could help them develop and understand the industry better, and it helped them develop the tests that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So from 2004 to 2019, we got up to about 8,000 plus GISPs worldwide. And then as of this month, there's over 10,000, although some of them have expired, but they're still listed in the registry as having completed their certification. They just need to complete their renewal or their basically recertification if they've gone lapsed for too long. So the future, we'll talk more about the future at the very end here, but the future is where the goal was for GIS-CI to have 20,000 by the mid 2020s. I think COVID may have slowed that down a bit, or it may have kind of done the opposite. It's possible that with people being given less work to do during COVID, for some people, other people had more work to do, but for some people, they had the time to sit down and finally do this process that we're going to talk about here as we go through the GISP certification process. And here you can see how it grew, the number of people by year up through 2015. You can see in 2015, when the exam was added, there were already 7,000. And up to 2019, it still continued to grow even with the exam being added. And then I've kind of slipped in here the 2021 numbers that we just found out. 2006, you can see here, I just celebrated my 15-year anniversary as a GISP. I was one of the 1,375. So the current process. All right, it starts with an ethics statement, which is not put at the top for, arbitrarily. The number one thing we want to look at is, as a GISP, you're getting certified, and the integrity of the GISP depends on the ethics of the person and the individual. So there is an ethics statement that you have to sign and submit. It's not a very long statement, but it basically says that you're going to, use your power with responsibility, or whatever Uncle Ben said to Spider-Man there. You're going to be using this for ethical progress, if you want to think of it that way. In general, the experience level is about 4 years minimum. So you can think of, if you're thinking of taking the certification and you're just starting out in the industry, maybe you want to wait a little while until you have some more experience, because there is a minimum required years of experience, and they sum it up for you based on part-time and full-time, and there's different pro ratings that go into it. But there is a minimum level of education, minimum level of experience, and a minimum level of contributions to the industry. Okay, and that's an interesting one. A lot of certifications require you to do continuing ed. There is not a continuing ed requirement for GISP. Instead, the way we word it is you can go out and take classes which will add to your education, and these can be things like continuing ed classes if you want to do that, and you document the number of hours that you've used, and that all contributes to your education level in the industry. Your experience is obviously the amount of work you do or the time that you work in the industry. And then the contributions are how much you give back. So participating in IMAGIN is one way that I contribute back to the industry. Presenting today, this is something that I'll be able to use as a contribution to industry because I presented this talk, this webinar. So all these things are helping the industry grow and develop. So there's not a total number of points required, but there's a minimum required points in each of these categories as part of your portfolio that need to be submitted. And you do need to submit things like your transcripts, and if it's a continuing ed course, I believe you have to submit the overview of the course and the number of hours and instructions and signatures and things are required there. And then the big one that most people worry about is the Geospatial Core Technical Knowledge Exam, the GISCI test. So you can do these in any order. You don't have to do the portfolio first. You can do the test first and then do the portfolio. It's, there's a time limit as well, and I'll talk about that in a second here. But this gives you an idea of overall, we're looking for GISCI is looking for a very well-rounded individual that has not just a bunch of education. They didn't just graduate and get a master's in GIS. They aren't just working in the industry, but they're doing all of these things to make themselves a well-rounded individual in the GIS field. So currently there's the recertification process. So after you've become GISP certified, you do have to renew every 3 years, and the application is online. Basically, they're looking for any new additional education that you've done and contributions to the industry. The experience is optional, although most people that have GISP, I think the theory behind making it optional is that most people are working in the industry, and that's why they're doing the GISP. So you can add experience points as well, but it's not required. So you have to have a minimum number of education credits or points, and then a minimum number of contributions since your last renewal or since your last certification. There's no exam for recertification. You do the exam once and you're done, one and done. The application is completely online and it's good for 3 years. A lot of people ask about the costs. It's really not bad when you look at the cost of other certifications that are out there in industry. Unfortunately, it's not just a one-time fee because the renewal does require a fee as well. So the initial application fee is $100. The portfolio review is also $100. And then to take the exam, it's $250 unless you're international, and then there's a $300 fee for that. And then the annual maintenance is $95 a year, which you have the first year free because it's part of the application fee. And then in the second year, you start paying your annual fee. And you can prepay that. You can prepay for the full 3 years, and I think you save about 5% there. So the annual maintenance fee, if you do $285 one time, then you don't have to pay again for 3 years. Okay. So the moment you've all been waiting for, let's talk about the exam. So the exam was created, it was developed based with the GISCI board developed they've hired a project manager and what they call a psychometric consultant to basically do a job analysis of what all GIS people, not necessarily just GIS analysts and GIS managers and GIS people, but anyone in industry who uses GIS. So this could be biologists, this could be surveyors, it could be anyone who uses GIS. They went through and tried to pull together information about what they do. In 2015, they deployed the first they called it the inaugural exam. And even to this day now, you can take it. It's offered twice a year, and you can take it in the spring, summer, or the fall. And it's only offered twice a year, so you have to pick your date. Developing the test was basically, it was a collaboration by all the GISPs at the time. And what we did is we sort of comprised a summary of all the different skills that we use for the GIS related tasks that we do for our jobs. Okay, and it was designed to be used by primarily people that had at least 4 years of experience, essentially people that were already GISPs. And then it put together what was considered sort of this core knowledge base. This, all this knowledge was gathered together, and they were very specific about not making it software oriented. You want to get ArcGIS Pro certified, you can go do that through ESRI. There are industry certifications that are specific to software. This was meant to be very non-software specific. So whether you use QGIS or whether you use ArcGIS, it doesn't matter. We're trying to get information about, we're developing knowledge of GIS at a slightly higher level, not down to the software specific tasks. So with all of the different jobs that are performed by GISPs, they narrowed it down to just 44 knowledge, skills, and abilities areas, the KSAs. And what it ended up being was it took out all the software-based stuff. So a lot of people submitted information about what they do. Programmers were involved, and there is programming involved in the test. But we tried to take out anything, or GISCI tried to take out anything that was not applicable to everyone that would use GIS, if that makes sense. So you can take the exam at any time in your career. A lot of times students ask, should I wait till I graduate? Should I wait till I'm out in industry for a while? Usually you do want to wait till you have a little bit of experience, but if you're someone who's got some experience in the field and you're now going back to school, you don't have to wait until after graduation. You can take it at any time. And some people say it's better to take it while school is still fresh in your memory, because once you get into industry, as many of you know, you may end up focusing very specifically on a particular industry and maybe just doing data entry, for example. So you may want to do it while you still have sort of the skills and the knowledge of GIS in general. There is a 6-year window, a timer that starts once you either pass the exam or submit and get your portfolio approved. So a lot of people kind of wonder whether they should do one before the other. Most people put together the portfolio, get that submitted, get it approved, so they know they've got all the experience, they've got all the contributions, they've got all the education. Once that's approved, then the timer starts, and you have 6 years to complete the test to get your certification. Others, if you're not real big on pressure or something, maybe you take the exam first just to see whether you're even going to be close. So you take the exam, you pass the exam, and as soon as you pass the exam, that 6-year window starts. Then you have to start developing your portfolio. Maybe you don't have enough experience in industry yet, so you've passed the exam, you have 6 years now to develop that 4 years of experience and get that portfolio approved. So you can do it in any order, it doesn't matter, but there is a time limit. Otherwise, you're going to have to resubmit your portfolio or retake the exam. So I won't go into this too much, but basically there was over 400 different components or pieces of GIS knowledge that were developed when they were doing the developing a curriculum, the DACM. They were doing that job analysis, and they took all those tasks, put them into different categories. They identified 400 different knowledge areas and assembled this GIS&T, GIS, Geographic Information Science and Technology, body of knowledge, and they narrowed it down to just 44 different topics. So of those 400, 44 were selected that were not general enough, but they were appropriate enough for all different fields. These were the original 400 and kind of broken up into different categories. And you can see, there were a lot in analytical methods. That's obviously a big part of any GIS job once you get to a certain level. If you're not doing analysis, you may not be really considered a GIS professional, but that depends on the field, I suppose. You can see how they broke down, and of these, they weeded them down into what we see here. So there's 10 different categories. I'll go through these really quickly, and you can see the percentage weight of the test. So these are the, about roughly most of them are about 10% of the test. when they broke them all down, but they weren't trying to meet any quotas. They just wanted to fit them into categories and then make sure they were general enough to apply to anyone in industry, whether they're a biologist, a chemist doing field work, or a surveyor, or anyone else doing GIS. So you can see conceptual foundations, their understanding of datums and coordinate systems. I'm not going to read all these, but you can see, basically how they pulled them together. These are the different knowledge areas that the questions were pulled from for each of these categories. So about 10% through all of these. Temporal data is a big part of it. Metadata is important. And then 2D and 3D visualization. So through data acquisition, data manipulation, obviously editing and modifying data and preparing data is a huge part of any GIS project. I can't think of any project I've ever worked on where I just opened up my GIS software and the data just loaded in directly. It's very rare. Analytical methods, making sure you understand the data properly, you process the data properly. This is actually I think it's one of the critical methods, because our critical categories, because if you don't interpret your data properly, you're really not, you're taking away value from the data and from the data collection. There's a lot of ways to misinterpret data, and we want to make sure that the test is trying to make sure that people understand the proper way of analyzing the data. And then the last 4 here, database design and management. I think this one is only about 7%. But it's not necessarily specific. It isn't specific to any particular database program. So you're not asked how would you, create a new view in a database. That they're talking about whether you understand what a view is or what a query is. Those are the kind of important components of database design. Data security is an important part of database design. Application development, they're not looking for programmers, but they want to make sure that you're able to kind of do that business analysis, that translation of what the programmers are needing to do from the GIS standpoint. So I need this button to do these tasks in this order, and kind of a general understanding of coding and scripting and modeling. A lot of people panic when they see application development on the test as a 7 or 10% category. I think it's a 7%. Systems design, helping people understand what they're going to need in order to build the GIS. People, often come to consultants and say, I need GIS. Well, does that mean you need the software installed, or do you need a department developed for your organization with staff and different levels and GIS managers? And what do you mean when you say I need GIS? So designing your system and managing your system is important to understand as well. And then some of the things in industry. The last category is the professional practice category, trying to identify proper interpretation. And then it gets into a little bit of the ethics as well that we talked about with the ethics statement. So this is the review again, that same slide with the different percentages on it. All right, so I'm not going to read all these, but basically the test gives a lot of weight, a lot of credence to the GISP certification. So without the test, people that were GISP certified, it didn't mean as much to industry. Now that the test is required, industry is actually starting to, raise the demand for the GISP credential. We're seeing GISP in a lot more job descriptions now when people are looking to hire. GISP preferred is a very common term you'll see throughout some of the different job boards that are out there. The GISP certification isn't just, hey, I've been doing this for a long time and yeah, I got my degree. It's much more to it now. It also gives students a much higher leg up in industry when they're going out there to apply for jobs after they graduate. Having that GISP certification, it shows that they're not just a fresh graduate. I'm not just, walking out here and, ready to start a career. I've started to develop my career direction, and I've committed to the GIS industry. So a little advice for students, get on LinkedIn. I can't tell you how many I teach at a a local community college here, and I teach GIS and mapping classes. And one of the things we always tell all our students to do is, while you're a student, start your LinkedIn now and start making connections. Connect with your professors, connect with anyone else in the industry that you know that is doing GIS. Connect with other students. You know, if you connect now, you can use that to build your network later on. Networking is such a huge part. As many of you already know, networking is a huge part of expanding yourself into the GIS industry. You can actually start your portfolio with, it doesn't start that clock when you start the portfolio. You can go to the GISC site and create your portfolio and start adding to it and develop it over a number of years. So it's a great way to keep track of, hey, I attended this webinar, or I led a webinar. You can go and add that as part of your portfolio, and it'll keep track of the dates and all the information you need. So you don't have to go back later and say, oh, that thing I did 2.5 years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, but you can use your portfolio on the GISCI site to keep track of all this stuff as you're building it up. It's a nice repository where you don't have to worry about losing it or having to find it later. You know, plan to take the test. Join associations. This is another one we tell all our students, especially because as a student in any college or university, you typically get a really, really huge discount on that annual membership fee, including Imagine. Imagine is one where students get a really good deal on their annual membership fee, because Imagine and other associations know that students don't have a lot of money and they're very busy, and we want to try and, you know, get them involved in the industry early. And then joining other GIS user groups is also a really great way to expand your networking. Many of you are here for that exact reason. How to study for the exam? Well, there's a lot of great ways to do it, but you can download the exam candidate manual from GISCI. That GIS&T body of knowledge is great reference material, but be careful because they have all 400 of those KSAs in there. You really only need to study the 44 that are focused on for the test. ERISA has some exam prep info. There's other KSA materials out there. Once you know the 44 KSAs, which were listed, some of them were listed above, you can use the web search for them. Use your textbooks and your classroom materials. And then one of the most helpful tools is the official practice exam, which I have a link to right here. So you can go to the GISCI website and you can you can download or take the practice exam, which is a great way to get ready for the test and get a feel for what the test interface will be like. I think Magda will be talking about that in a little more detail here shortly. So other resources for preparing, you got the Geotech Center. There's professional assessment tools out there that are online. I talked about the practice exam, and there's a lot of other materials out there. But the focus here is make sure you're not going into the entire geospatial world. Focus on those 44 knowledge, skills, and abilities categories. So I'll go through the future direction pretty quickly, but basically the exam will continue to be updated and maintained. Questions will be added and removed as they become appropriate. We may have some certification in specializations. That's one of the things that's being proposed. And we're trying to expand internationally as well. There may be some new member organizations as well that can be brought in, both worldwide and just in the US. But again, the goal is to try and get to 20,000 within, by the mid 2020s. We're also reaching out to students a lot. There's a USGS summer intern program where as soon as you register with GISCI and you start your portfolio, you don't have to be approved, but if you start your portfolio, you're now eligible for consideration in the GIS summer intern position with USGS. So any students that are on the webinar, you may be interested in looking at some of these internships with USGS. Again, these are the member organizations. And that's all I have for you. We're going to now turn it over to Magda. Unless there's questions that I need to address right now, we may be doing all the questions at the end, but I'll turn it over to Magda, and she's going to talk about her experience going through the process over the past year.
Thanks, Scott, and good morning, everyone. My name is Magda DiFranco, and I'm a GIS specialist for Clinton Township. I was certified early this year in January, and I'm kind of here to tell you about my own experience with the GISP process and kind of how it was affected by the pandemic, because that's been an interesting journey, to say the least. So Scott already kind of did a great job going through the standard GISP certification path, so I'm not really going to spend much time here. The basic steps is just gathering all your documents to complete your portfolio. You can, like you said, you can take the exam before completing or submitting your application, or you can do that after. You can register for the exam online, or you pay all your fees. Basically, you study, take, and pass the exam in order to get your certification, and then you can add the GISP after your name. Once you're certified, you can start gathering your documentation for recertification in 3 years. I'm finding that it is easier to do so as I go, like adding that webinar that we're doing today to my portfolio, so I can have it for certification in 3 years. It's just easier to do it now than scrambling right before your due date to track down everything you need. Oh, that got out of the full screen. There you go. So my GIS certification path kind of followed those general steps, although it has taken me a couple years to complete. I've heard of the certification pretty early on in my career, but I didn't think I had enough experience at the time to qualify, so I just waited. Then the 2015 exam was introduced, and it kind of seemed daunting, so I kept putting it off. I've started to gather all my documents for the portfolio in 2018, but slacked off to actually complete the application until I attended Scott's presentation at 2019 IMAGIN. He kind of got me motivated to finish the process, so I registered for the June session of the exam in February of 2020. My application got approved right prior to that, so I only had the exam to go, and I had 4 months to review the materials. I thought I got this, no big deal, right? And then March 2020 happened. So that kind of the ensuing chaos, working from home. I have 2 little kids that were now home full time and doing school at home. So that kind of put a wrench in my plans of kind of getting at least 15 minutes of studying every day. I got so much for the 4 months of prep. I kind of studied during that time. We were under a stay-at-home order, so I really didn't know if the tests will take place or not. The testing center, PSI, had a website with a list of all the closed testing centers. So I bookmarked that, checked very often. During the stay-at-home order, all of the Michigan centers were closed. So I had no idea if the test will happen or not. But I kept studying because what if it does and I'm not ready? The stay-at-home order was lifted on June 1st, and my exam date was June 6th. So like, okay, maybe the exam will actually happen after all. The testing centers reopened, but with restrictions. So we're not able to have as many people in a testing center as normal capacities. And 24 hours before my exam, I got an email notifying me that it got canceled. It was quite frustrating. I spent all that time getting ready and it's not going to happen. And then I'll have to do it again. I had a friend who registered for the same exam session, but in Chicago area, and his testing center did not cancel. So he actually got to take his exam in June. So I just waited and registered for the next session in December of 2020, hoping that by then the world will kind of go back to normal. Here, it's the next slide. Since I already reviewed the material once, the second time was a little bit easier. And in the meantime, the GSCI actually released the official practice exam that's supposed to emulate the true experience of that browser-delivered exam. So that was really nice to actually have that practice where it looks very much the same as the actual exam, where you get to mark questions if you have to go back to them. It kind of shows you that same process. So it was very helpful. It was worth it, and I think it was on like $35. Don't remember the exact price, but you were able to take it twice, and GSCI suggests that you take it once before you actually start preparing for your exam, so you can assess where your strengths and weaknesses are. It gives you a very detailed report on what you got, which questions you got right, which ones you got wrong, and which general areas you need to focus on. So it was kind of a useful tool in guiding into what I needed to review a bit more. And I took the practice exam the second time right before the real exam, just to see if, you know, it's the same practice exam, so it's the same questions, but they do it in different order, and supposedly you're taking it months apart, so it kind of gives you a better kind of gives you an assessment of how far you've come in a way. So once it hit 24 hours before my exam and I still didn't get an email to cancel, I finally got excited. Okay, it's happening this time, I can get it over with. So the next morning, I show up at this kind of a nondescript office building in Southfield, and that's where the PSI just had its testing center. It was full of other people taking all different kinds of exams, so it's not just people taking GISP exams. It's everybody. You're not allowed to bring anything inside, so everything gets put in the locker. All you have is your mask, and they give you a piece of paper and a pencil. It was quite a bit. It was a little bit surreal. It was 4 hours while wearing mask, and their AC wasn't working very well. So it was a room full of people with 20 or so computers. So we got pretty warm there. When that was done, I was done for the rest of the day. It was a bit tiring. But I left around noon. Almost took almost the whole 4 hours. And you don't find out that you passed until a couple of weeks later, when you get an email that you either pass or fail. They will not tell you which questions you got wrong or right. They will not tell you your score. It's just whether it's a pass or fail. And since my application was already approved prior to taking the exam, I received my certification number pretty quickly right after the notification of passing the exam. And I was allowed to use my GSP title right away. And a couple of months later, I received a little pin and a certificate in the mail. And they also sent a folder to hold all your documentation for certification. Overall, the process was not as daunting or intensive as I originally thought. You know, of course, minus the pandemic, but I wish I've done it earlier. Didn't have to worry about the exam as much as I thought I did. Why is it doing that? Couple exam prep tips, and Scott also went over this already. Review and prepare in advance. The night before is not going to cut it. There is a lot of material. It's pretty broad and covers a wide range of topics. So give yourself some time to prepare. GISCI website is a great resource. It's got all the links on what to expect, and there's an official study guide that I actually ended up using quite a bit. It was put together by Miklos Nadas, I think that was his name. He was a GSP that was studying for the exam a couple years back, and he just kind of went through all of the knowledge categories and the KSAs and pulled out lots of definitions and links. And so now it's got this like 20-30 page document that they actually make available for you. And mine had a ton of notes on the side, and I found it to be really, really helpful. Taking the practice exam is also a great prep tip. It will give you your strengths and weaknesses and kind of can guide you on what you need to review while you prepare for the exam. So for the topics that I was somewhat less comfortable with, I reviewed some of the GIS cartography textbooks that I still had from my college days. Also knowing what to expect. You got 4 hours for 180 questions. Only 100 of them will be scored, but you won't know which ones. They always put some questions in to test future questions for exams, but you won't know which one it is. There's 2 types of questions that are asked on the exam: multiple choice and multiple response. So pay attention to the type of question it is, so you know how many answers you're supposed to select. Multiple choice, you only get one one correct answer, but multiple response, you have at least 2 correct answers, and they won't tell you how many. So there's at least 2. You will see that there's select all that apply at the end of the question, so that will kind of clue you in as to, okay, I at least need 2 correct answers, maybe more. Again, it's on the computer at one of the PSI testing centers. You can't bring anything in, you got pen and paper. You pass or fail at 73 correct questions out of the hundreds that get scored. General test taking tips: get a good night of sleep. Don't try to cram everything the night before. If you've prepared ahead of time, all you can do at that time is just get some sleep. Use your time wisely. Read the questions carefully. If you are stuck on a question, you really don't know the answer, just mark it, move on. You use that whole 4 hours if you need. You're not gonna get any extra points for finishing early. My method was to do 3 passes. So first pass of all the 180 questions was to answer all of the ones that I was pretty sure I knew the answer to. So I answered those first, and whatever I wasn't sure about, I just marked it. In the software, it gives you an option to mark it, and then you're able to come back to your marked questions easily. My second pass was to review all of those marked questions to narrow down my choices. So if you know that it's an actually wrong answer, so at least you can throw out some of those out. And the idea is that maybe something in the test actually jogged your memory or was helpful. And I found that was the case with a couple of questions, where a question down the road kind of jogged my memory about a question I wasn't sure about earlier on. And third pass, if all fails, guess. At least you make an educated guess. You eliminated some of the wrong answers. But if you're really struggling between B and C, at some point you just have to guess. It's better to have something, better to have one answer than no answer at all. Whoa, where did that go? Sorry, I lost my PowerPoint on my computer. Oh, there it is. Final thoughts: don't let the exam stop you from applying, completing your certification. Yes, it might seem daunting, and it is. It will take some time to prepare for, but it really isn't. It really wasn't as bad as I thought. I realized that I knew more than I thought I did. I wish I'd taken it earlier, that I didn't wait as long as I did, and that, you know, now that it's done, I don't have to retake it again unless I let my certification lapse. But that was definitely the case for me, where I just slacked off on completing the certification because of the exam. It's helpful to start the process, or at least your portfolio, as early as possible in your career. I had to track down quite a bit of documentations and go back and try to remember when I did something, or the conference I attended, and things like that. So it's just easier to do as you go, because the GISCI website kind of gives you a catch-all on you putting all of your information in there and uploading all your documents, and just makes it easier that way. The GIS certification was really becoming more recognized, like Scott said, and it's often a preferred qualification in new job descriptions. I see it as a very useful tool for career advancement. Not that I'm going anywhere right now, but I feel like it validates all your experiences in education and your training. So it kind of gives you a little point. It's a bit of a point of pride, I find it to be. So if you're putting it off, kind of like I did, go ahead and get it done. This is your go-to. Come on, get it done. You can do this. My employer actually covered some of the costs, so it was quite convenient. So I didn't really have to pay out of pocket for any of the fees, and I'm just really glad I did it. It was an interesting experience with the pandemic and everything, but it's a good tool to have in your pocket as a GIS professional. So that's really all I have. And if you have any questions, Scott and I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Scott and Magda. We do have one question that's come in so far. Ben asks, do you anticipate stacked certifications, i.e. specialties that supplement the basic GISP?
I don't think it's coming anytime in the real near future, but since I did mention that they're looking at trying to put together the potential, they're investigating the potential of doing industry specific. I think it kind of varies too much from the initial intent of the GISP. The goal was to try and make it general enough to cover all industries. So it's a good question, and I don't know that I can answer it. So how's that for a non-answer?
Well, and it does seem like you said, Scott, that they are investigating some potential changes down the road at some point. Nothing imminent now, but some enhancements, obviously, as they're trying to continue to validate the necessity of having the certification process, because it's not a licensure, as you talked about too.
Yeah, and I do think there is a lot of value in doing the GISP and then coupling that with a industry certificate or a software specific certification. So, you know, for example, getting ArcGIS certified or ESRI certified in addition to your GISP, that kind of really stacks up the letters after your name when you put your signature at the bottom of your email.
Yep.
Absolutely. We had one additional just comment, and that was from Ariana, just saying to Magda, what an ordeal. Congratulations on getting through your certification process.
Thanks.
And that's very good to see. So again, I want to just thank you, Scott and Magda, for presenting to us today. A lot of great information for those of us that are needing to look at it. I know I've been a GISP for many years now, early on with you, Scott. And it has proved very valuable to me, and it's good to see the enhancements coming through the program. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for presenting, and I want to just highlight a few things to all of you that are attending. Make sure to keep tabs on our Imagine social media and our website. There's a lot of things that are going to be coming out here soon for fall events. We're looking at a new webinar series for ArcGIS Pro. Meetups, hopefully we'll be able to continue, assuming that the pandemic can keep easing. I know we're in a little bit of a hold right now with some increased numbers, but we're looking forward to getting back together, and certainly mark your calendars for June of next year. Information will start coming out as we do plan to get our conference back on task and in person up on Mackinac Island. Several people are jumping in quickly at the end with thank yous for the presentation, but one question did just come in. So since we're here and we've got a minute, I'll ask that. Are there examples of contributions and experiences that qualify for the portfolio? That's asked by Megan. So I don't know if Scott or Magda, do you have any examples of your contributions and experience that qualified?
I used my conference attendance, conference presentations, webinars like this to, if you're in educational field, if you're doing any kind of research and published papers, those kind of things all count. I don't know what else, Scott.
Yeah, I was going to say, as an instructor, I have to be careful on not double count points. You know, teaching a class in GIS could theoretically go either way, but I always use it towards my professional experience. My contributions to industry, typically, as Magda said, it's participating on the board for Imagine. That's one that, you know, they give you different levels of points. There's a whole index that they give you to try and identify how many points you're going to get for each contribution, depending on how long it is and what it is. Doing the presentations, just attending conferences is a great way to stay active, and, you know, it's considered participation in industry or contribution to industry. So giving talks like this, as Magda said, we're getting mad points right now just for doing this, you know, if we want to count them, we need them. It's a great way to do it.
And if you start your portfolio early, you can kind of see what points you're missing. So you have a couple years to kind of get involved. Like even having Imagine, being a part of Imagine, being a member of Imagine counts.
Yeah, and I don't believe they ever expire until you use them for a renewal. So everything that you've done since your last renewal or since your certification, you can just keep adding it up and keep accumulating those points.
Yep, and I'll just put a plug in. We're going to be starting to look for Imagine presenters for next year's conference too, and that's some good points you can get that way too. So
yeah, great segue question.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Magda, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon on our next webinar or our next event.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Magda.
Bye.